Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
A few weeks ago, we recorded a podcast called Life is Not a Dress Rehearsal. It's about deferring your life or deferred life program into the future. And the podcast really took off. People are digging it like crazy. You might have heard it yourself and made a comment or come over and shared some of your experiences or stories. It's been a really cool podcast to see how people are taking some of the ideas in that. We didn't really even plan it. We just kind of decided to record this one day. And one thing I want to do today is to check in with myself and Antonia. Based on that podcast, we were talking about how we didn't want to defer our lives anymore. We're really starting to hook things up for ourselves in the way we want to craft them at our ages. And I want to check in with us now and have a conversation with you briefly today about where we're at and some of the things that have been ahas for us lately and some of the personal growth things that we've connected in our own minds and hearts. And the reason I want to do that is we're getting ready to go into several type-focused podcasts in the next few weeks. So this is kind of a personal growth-focused podcast because we're going to start talking about personality type in some significant ways. Usually in the fall, we talk about type a lot. We kind of still frame it in personal growth, but we definitely go down into the nitty-gritty of how type works and how the Myers-Briggs system works. So before we go into that in the next few weeks, I just wanted to have, I guess, a last podcast this fall talking about some personal growth stuff and check in with both of us. We've really started to architect our lives differently. Like at the time of this recording right now, we just finished our relationship event. We're still with our equipment set upstairs where it's normally down in the basement, but we're upstairs. Piper is right behind us, our daughter, our 6-year-old daughter, on the couch. She's listening to her headphones, doing some educational stuff on the iPhone so that she can be quiet during this recording. So you might even hear her like clanging on some dishes and stuff. And we're trying to incorporate her into our lives more as we move forward because we think it's really important that we don't live separate lives from our children. And so we're trying to find ways to graft her into the experience of creating personality hacker content and anything else we do, whether we're going to go to meetups or live events. So our lives are shifting, not in drastic, radical ways, but I think in really positive, forward-moving ways. And I'd like to share some of those things with you today. And then at the end of this podcast, invite you to come over and share some of the things maybe you're doing in your life to reconnect personal growth and some of the things that may be ahas for you and how maybe you're shifting in the last few months. You've shifted some energies or you're shifting some things in yourself. And we'd love to hear about those if you want to share after the podcast.
I think for me, you mentioned what I think was my biggest takeaway or has been my biggest takeaway recently in that I can't keep kicking the can down the road of my life thinking that it's going to start soon or it's going to start later. I think the number one thing for me is realizing how much I've been sort of disconnected from Piper because she's so young. And everything we do in our business is so heady. Like it requires skills that a 5-year-old wouldn't have. But now that she's 6 and I'm focusing more on how we're going to be educating her, and we can't put her in traditional school. I'd probably have her in public school at this point if we could, but we can't do that because we do too much travel. And so since we travel so much, we'd have to pull her out of school so often that we'd probably get nailed for truancy.
Oh, yeah.
Like in the first couple months, we'd get nailed for truancy. So we have to have some sort of like home education system. And so we decided to go cyber school since I don't really have time to create a full curriculum for her. So we've decided to do cyber school because the curriculum is created and then we just have to follow it. And what I'm really excited about is doing work side by side with her. And we've got her all set up with cyber school. She's going to be really focused on, first grade and picking up some of these skills that we're hoping to incorporate by sort of pulling her into our life. And I realized one thing that you and I have very much benefited from is that our parents gave us a very strong work ethic. Like we have a very, we almost have too much of a go mentality. But I think that's subsidized our entire life is our work ethic. And I was trying to figure out why, what did our parents do to help create that work ethic? And it's very clear it's that it was their ride and we had to go with them on their ride. Like my parents were missionaries and they were in full-time ministry all the time. And whenever they were doing any sort of work, I was with them. I didn't get to stay home. I had a very truncated childhood experience in some ways. My high school was filled with activity and work. When I got home from school, I didn't get to just chill. I had to do my homework immediately because I almost always had responsibilities. And I thought they helped me create a work ethic by perpetually incorporating me into their lives. And I think we do a lot of like designing our lives around our children these days. Like we're all about them. And I think in some ways, us focusing more on our kids has actually been healthy as a culture. I think kids have been very much, neglected and kind of abused and just seen as like short adults for way too long. So I don't think that we should forget that that's been growth for our culture as a whole. And at the same time, 100% designing our life around our kids. I mean, kids, of course, are meant to play. And so that means that we don't necessarily push them or encourage them into a work ethic as much. So being sensitive to that and knowing that she still needs a lot of play, I think one of the big ahas for me is that we need to start incorporating her more into our life and stop handing her over to babysitters to ensure that she has playmates, right? Like that's been the big concern, is that she always has somebody to play with her. And I'm like, okay, we'll play with you, kid, but you also got to come work with us. So now it's going to be a lot more of Piper helping us in our business so that we can help her generate that work ethic as well. And that's been a really big aha for me.
Yeah. Some of the other things that have come up for me are this idea of boundaries. And, we talk about boundaries. If you're an INFJ, you probably heard us talk about boundaries to the end of the world, right? We've talked about this a lot to certain personality types, not just INFJs, other types as well. And when I say boundaries, I don't mean the social boundaries, which I do mean that, but that's not exclusively what I mean. What the boundaries that I'm realizing is if we desire, Antonia, to make an impact in the world that we want to make, we have to guard our energies and guard our intentions and create good boundaries around them in order to make traction. Because if we allow every distraction to come in to our lives, that can derail the movement forward that we want. So, in the early days of Personality Hacker, we had a mission, but also we were looking to survive. We were trying to make sure we could pay the bills. And that's always, as a business owner, like you're always worried about that. If you have payroll or a team you've got to pay, or vendors or affiliates, there's a lot of moving parts to a business. It's a lot of burden more than it is, just this easy lifestyle often. And I think that's something some people that don't own businesses don't understand. Is most business owners that I know, they're stressing out how to pay their employees, and they're like figuring out how to make sure they can keep the lights on and keep things moving. And they're not Machiavellian, twiddling their fingers, plotting how they're going to, screw people over. They're genuinely concerned about the people in their sphere. And I'm realizing that. Like I realize there's a big responsibility when you are a business owner, an entrepreneur, or something like this. So the boundaries help us serve the people like yourself listening, our audience, our members, the people in our tribe, and certainly our team members. And so I think we've learned a lot in the last few years working with team members and creating those boundaries. And I think the success that we're going to create, that I think is going to be helpful to the world, is partly going to be how well we honor those boundaries. And that's tough because, we get a lot of emails, we get a lot of people. We want to connect with you. We want to talk with you and connect with you. And then when a chorus of people are sending a lot of stuff in, and I'm not boo-hooing, there's nothing wrong with this, but it's like, how do you accommodate, how do you make sure you can communicate with enough people and make them feel understood and heard, and also keep doing the things you have to do to make everything go? And so I think we're playing with these energies too. And that for me, that's a really big aha. And it's hard. It's so hard for me to be definitive and guard my time and energies. Like that's just not how I'm wired. I'm kind of like open borders with it, and not like letting people walk on me, but I definitely don't want to be like, hey, I can't talk right now, I gotta do this thing. So that's been a big shift in me. I don't know if you've had that change for you. You've probably been better at that anyway already.
Well, I'm kind of spotty at it. Sometimes I, just sort of ignore those kinds of messages, and other times I spend like 2 hours answering them. So I think I've had to be a little bit more sort of like less haphazard around it. But I think for me, a part of this, you're right, is creating good boundaries, and I wouldn't say, not borders, but boundaries. understand that whole need to create really healthy boundaries. But for me, I think it's been more sort of mimetic boundaries.
Yeah.
Like encroaching messages. Because there's only so much psychological real estate you have to apply to certain things. And I feel like right now the world is filled with some very sort of encroaching messaging that I don't think is healthy for somebody who wants to be on a mission.
Yeah.
Like everywhere I turn, society is trapped in a drama triangle. Everywhere I turn. And it's so easy to get into a perspective or be pulled into a perspective where you either take on the moniker of villain, victim, or hero. It's so easy to do that. And I think part of what you're talking about is with the idea of like having to answer everybody who sends me a Facebook message and ask for my advice. I have a froggy throat this podcast. If we have to stop and edit every time I have to like get the frog out of my throat, I think we won't be able to have a podcast. So I just want to warn you, the audience member, that, you know, for some reason my voice is just not showing up today as well. So just my apologies for that. But what you're talking about with people, like, you know, I'll get Facebook messages that just say, hey, I'm a INTP, advice? It's like, well, I don't know, man. I don't know your life. I can't give you advice. And so with those, you have to sort of have the space to, you know, feel free to say no to people who request your, you know, your advice, or especially non-specific advice like that. But I think even more so is you can't, like, I have to guard against my desire to be a hero in those moments. When people give me a story of they're in a bad way, my hero tendency is so strong to go, oh, I can save you. And I think for me, one of the big things I've had to do to stay on, you know, to make sure that my psychological real estate is focused on the mission at hand and the things that we want to do, is I've had to make sure that all of these encroaching drama triangle narratives, that I'm not starting to slurp them in and see myself as hero. Or when somebody puts me in the position of villain because I didn't do what they wanted me to do. I wasn't able to save them, or I wasn't able, you know, quote unquote, to save them. Not that I don't think people really thinking about it in this way. I don't think when they reach out or, you know, try to connect that they're thinking in terms of, you know, you should be a hero to save me, because I don't think anybody wants to see themselves in that disempowered of a state. But I do think that when things don't pan out, sometimes it's very easy to project, you know, like a villain status, and or even if they don't, it's very easy for me to put that on myself. Like if things don't turn out well, it's very easy for me to go, oh, I'm a bad guy here. And then on top of it, I think I get really frustrated with a lot of the victim messaging that I see over and over in society. Like everywhere I turn, every article I read, every tweet I read, like it's just this victim messaging is getting so encroaching. It's so powerful. Yeah. It's so overwhelming to me how everywhere I look, there's a victim. And I think right now it's a leveraging trick. It's a power leveraging trick. We're right now putting so much power in victims' hands. Not to say that there aren't legitimately people who have been victimized. I'm not trying to indicate that nobody's ever been victimized and that nobody's a victim. I actually do think that people can be victims, which is different than some of my, you know, fellow, you know, sort of that grave sick sort of nobody's a victim, everybody's creating their own reality, you know, concept. I part a little bit from that, going like, nah, maybe not everybody's 100% invited everything they're experiencing in their life. Although we do that more than we own up to. That said, even though I do believe people can be victimized, I'm watching people use victimhood as a strategy to maintain relevance and power and to try to shift power. I'm seeing it everywhere. And so it's hard to ignore that kind of messaging. It's hard to like keep my psychological real estate from just slurping up this drama triangle messaging. Like either I need to be out there saving people, or I need to be seeing myself as a villain, maybe because of, I don't know, things that are incidental to my life, regardless of whether or not it's my, you know, my status, my race, my, you know, sort of my position in life, or any other number of things, maybe just my personality type, right? Like things that I didn't really choose. So I have to like avoid taking on villain status and wanting to make compensation for being a villain by jumping back into hero, that it's my job to save everybody. And then I have to really sort of move myself away from these victim messaging because, quite frankly, they frustrate me. Like I get kind of upset at all the victim messaging. And then that puts me back in, oh, am I a bad guy? Am I the villain?
Yeah.
So it's so easy to just throw all the psychological real estate to all of these encroaching messages from media and from social media and all these different, all of these different angles that I think one of the number one things I've had to do is create a mimetic boundary to go, you know what? I'm not going to think about that. I'm just not. I'm gonna try to do everything I can to show up as powerful and as empowered as I possibly can be in and of myself, combining it with as much compassion as I possibly can. And then I'm going to recoup all of that lost psychological real estate. I'm going to pour it back into my mission and my kid and the people who are helping support this mission. And I'm going to try to recoup what is lost in the drama triangle and actually truly put it back into an empowerment dynamic where we don't have to lose ourselves to these three positions of villain, victim, hero. We can actually retain it. And I think this probably sounds weird in this context of life is not a dress rehearsal, but I almost feel like the drama triangle, like that is the dress rehearsal. That is dress rehearsal mentality. This idea of like something has to get fixed before I can live my empowered life.
Yeah.
Something else has to be fixed before I can show up. That is dress rehearsal mentality. The drama triangle is a replication of plays and narratives that we see on TV and in theater. It is theater, the drama triangle is.
It's make-believe.
It's make-believe. And so the more we allow ourselves to get pulled into this drama triangle concept, the less we are actually living our life because we believe that just by jumping on drama triangle trains, like being a part of some sort of... like we'll save a certain percentage of the population by holding up, signs or whatever, which maybe that's working. That's cool. If that's somebody living their real life, then I salute them. I think they should keep doing it. But it's not even so much the specific actions or behaviors, it's the mentality behind it. And to me, being a part of that drama triangle, or at least separating myself out from it and having strong boundaries against it, is a big piece of how I'm able to start living my life now. And not keep kicking the can down the road thinking, well, as soon as this thing gets fixed, then we'll all be living our real life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to that point, I think that you make a good point about all the distractions mimetically in the media, like our culture. I've just cut it out. Like I'm tired of it. And I know that it is so pervasive. It chases you. The culture and the media chase you to say, you don't get to opt out from this. Like everywhere you go, you're going to see this. Even if you opt out, you hear people talk about it. There's the news cycle that's just insane. If I have to get on Twitter or social media to do businessy stuff, right, or promote something we're involved in here at Personality Hacker that's mission-based, you see it. So it's impossible to cut out altogether. It just really is. But I guess that's the thing. I've just opted out. I'm trying to stay away from it as much as possible, and I've been a lot happier because of it. And the boundaries I was talking about earlier, those boundaries and borders or the boundaries, not borders, I was talking about earlier, I framed it in almost like oh, I've got a lot of people asking for my attention, and I've got stuff to do, and I think that there's some of that. But honestly, like you listening, you're probably great. That it's not going to be a problem with you and the people that are part of the audience along with you. It's going to be cool. That's really not even what that's kind of the first, my mind was in this state of saying that to get to my next point, which was that the boundaries actually have started with myself, quite frankly. That's one of the biggest shifts that I've had in the last just few months, just in the last 3 months. I've realized that if I and we, Antonia, want to make the impact that we have to make, that idea of boundaries are so important for me. In other words, I have to be militant about my time. And you know who robs my time more than anyone? It's not you. It's not my kids. It's certainly not you listening or anybody else that's in the audience along with you. It is me. Like I get these little lazy moments or, oh, I can do that tomorrow. I don't need to push this extra little bit today. I'm going to just go ahead and do that another day when I feel like it. I'll wait till I feel like it. That statement I've had a lot as an ENFP, right? When I feel like it, I'll do this. And I've had to realize that I have to take control of how I feel. I have to take control of my time. And I think the biggest boundaries that I'm creating is within myself. I've done a lot of introverted feeling work. So that's authenticity. In the Myers-Briggs system, it's called introverted feeling. It's a cognitive function that I use as my co-pilot. And if you've heard us at all talk about personal growth, you've heard us talking about grow your co-pilot. That's the highest leverage thing you can do. And so I've been really focused on that. And at first it was frustrating. It was demoralizing. It was difficult because I'm not used to disciplining it and focusing on it. And I've spent years working at it. You might have heard, old podcasts, me talking about some of the things that I've done to work on that. And it's been a slow, painful, difficult, disciplined process over years of concerted effort. And I would say just in the last 3 months or so, I'm starting to also see the fruits of that. And it's really cool because what's come from it is Antonia and I are starting to show up to events and live webinars and even this podcast, and we're doing what's called channeling. And it sounds like it's spiritual, right? But it's not. We call it channeling because that's the closest thing we can kind of think. But we basically show up, we begin talking and extroverting using our extroverted intuition, which is our driver in the car model. If you've been following along Personality Hacker, we nicknamed it exploration. Antonia is an ENTP and I'm an ENFP. So we both share the same driver of that exploration process. And this idea of channeling is we let our minds go. We begin to talk around whatever we've been asked or a topic or something like this. And it's weird. The more I've worked on my introverted feeling, my co-pilot, the more I'm not relying on old habits and structures that would have been latched into my 10-year-old or tertiary process of extroverted thinking or effectiveness. Because that's where, if you heard the podcast on looping, you would know that it's very often that we loop. We go from our driver to our 10-year-old and back and forth, and we rely upon that 10-year-old to do a lot of heavy lifting for us. And I've done that in my life. I think you've probably done that in your life if you've been listening. And if you've made a concerted effort to grow your co-pilot, I can say that there's been a frustration to that probably for you, a difficulty. You probably hated doing it at times and made excuses why you shouldn't have to. I've done that. At least this is my experience. And then now that I've done it for so long and I'm focused on it, all of a sudden the rewards are starting to come. Like all of a sudden I've had like a breakthrough in the last 3 months. And I thought I was already in some developed ways around it. It wasn't crap. Like I was doing it well. All of a sudden I am able to get into my own core motivations. And I'm watching myself emotionally react to situations. And then I'm calling it out loud and saying, look at how I'm reacting. This is interesting. I'm almost seeing myself from a meta perspective and saying, Antonia, you just said this thing and I'm acting angry and frustrated right now. And I'm fully aware that I'm angry and frustrated. Let me see if I can find the motivation of why I'm angry and frustrated right now. Because it's not consciously at the top of my mind why this would be the case. This is an example, right, that I'm giving you from a conversation we had like last week. And then I start to articulate and I can find it inside of myself of the motivation of why I'm angry and frustrated and get right to the heart of what's going on for me very quickly and then calibrate forward. And I'm like, holy crap, this may not sound impressive to you if you're not an introverted feeling user, but this is like, I feel like it's a superpower all of a sudden. I'm moving through the world being able to not just read my own motivations, but when I see somebody else, oftentimes I can guess pretty closely to what their motivations are now too, because I've done it myself so much. This isn't to brag. This is just to say that it's interesting to see when you do concerted, directive personal growth work. And in this way, we're doing it through the lens of personality typology, right? I'm growing my co-pilot in the car model that we talk about Personality Hacker here all the time. I'm drinking my own Kool-Aid. I'm focusing on this. It was working really great. I was getting a lot of ahas. I've been leaning on it for a while. And then all of a sudden, bam, ratchet up to another level recently. And I'm amazed. I'm like, maybe there's even more levels I can ratchet this up to. This is incredible. And this idea of boundaries came from that. It came from this idea that if I'm going to continue on a personal growth path, I have to be very careful not to let energies disrupt that or hijack it. I have to be very careful that I don't self-sabotage it, that my own time management is in order to do so. And I can't let things come in. I have to guard my time and my energies with some intention, or it's going to be derailed. And that's just something, that's like a big aha in how I'm moving forward for me, because I want to be as open and as freeform, and I want to be as creative and free all the time. Like I want to just be able to pivot. And I'm realizing that can't be the case all the time. Like I've got to be more on a track, if that makes sense.
I find that to be a really interesting thought, that creating boundaries with yourself is basically, I mean, what I picked up from what you said, and we haven't really talked about that actually. We're kind of channeling right now in some ways. This idea that is effectively what self-discipline is. Self-discipline is creating boundaries with yourself, like not allowing yourself to do things that would not be in your own best interest. And we do that all the time, right? Almost like we're our own friends that, or not friends, but acquaintances or intimates or whatever, that will step over our own boundaries. We'll step over our own boundaries. We'll allow things to happen to ourselves that we really shouldn't because they're not healthy for us. And so creating boundaries with yourself is effectively self-discipline. It's requiring you to be more sort of assertive with what you'll tolerate in your own behavior, which I find a really fascinating concept. And going back, I was like, okay, so I went off on this whole thing about the drama triangle and this whole concept about like, not letting encroaching messages or energies come in. And then you talked about co-pilot development. And of course, I'm always like, okay, how do we tie this together? But you tied it together so beautifully at the end by basically saying this is how we protect ourselves. And I think for me right now, probably because I use extroverted feeling or harmony as my 10-year-old in my car model, these messages in the outside world around the drama triangle are very seductive to me. They're very seductive. My extroverted feeling or harmony function whenever I hear about misfortunes people have or situations that are unfair, like a big piece of me wants to go into saving mode, into hero mode. And I've had to create a boundary with myself to not let myself get sucked into that. And I bet somebody listening right now is probably kind of like, they're strongly disagreeing with me. They're thinking that these messages about, social justice and articles around how people should be, like the marginalized and disenfranchised should have attention towards them, that's not the drama triangle. That's just us making social progress. And I wouldn't necessarily disagree with that. I think we are making a lot of social progress, which is great. And also, we're sucked in the drama triangle at the same time. They're happening concurrently. So it's, for me, been really important to create a boundary with myself that I admire the progress we're making as society and at the same time don't get sucked into all this drama triangle that's happening and running concurrently as a power grab. And so for me, even though like what you're talking about, what I'm talking about feel like completely different topics, where they meet in the middle is that these are the boundaries we've had to create with ourselves. These are the things that we've had to do for self-discipline. And so they're just examples. And for you, the listener, you're going to have something else that is your boundary you create with yourself. You're going to have something else that is your time and energy suck. That's probably located somewhere around your 10-year-old function, where you have to create a boundary of self-discipline to make sure that you don't get sucked into whatever that is. And I think for a lot of people, those are super insidious because we have such a draw towards them. They're very seductive to us, those things that derail us and monopolize all our psychological real estate and have us going off into directions that kind of feel right, but then you realize you're not making any traction. Sometimes it's like a feeling function as your 10-year-old. That's what mine is. And so it's always like it feels like the right thing to do, and it feels like you're cold if you neglect it or reject it. Like you should be doing these things and you should be caring about all these messages and all this stuff. And it ends up being like just, throwing spaghetti against the wall and hoping something will stick. But regardless, whatever is found in there, like I think that is a major key to not kicking the can of your life down the road. You have to have enough energy and psychological real estate to be able to focus on the thing that you want. And sometimes I wonder if the reason why we let ourselves get sabotaged by that 10-year-old function and let ourselves get kind of pulled into all these different, directions is because we don't actually have a specific direction we're going. We don't know what we want. And so we allow society or messages from the outside world or even our own, our own lack of desire for self-discipline. We let that set the tone for where we're headed and going. And when that happens, when we outsource our direction, then we end up seeing all this other stuff that encroaches on us. We have to rationalize it. So then we call it noble. We project virtue onto the things that are distracting us. And it's because we don't want to see that actually we're directionless. We don't know where we're headed. And so we're going to let all this stuff kind of pull us out of it and gobble up all the psychological real estate and go, no, that's virtuous. That's noble. But I think we have this concept you and I have talked about, Joel, where we call them virtuous, noble distractions, right? Virtuous distractions, where it's actually quite unhealthy for us as an individual. Not that the thing itself is unhealthy. I don't think focusing on social justice is in and of itself unhealthy. I think there's a lot of progress that needs to be made. And I think that there's an insidious drama triangle that lives in there too. So which thing are you attracted to? Is it the actual social justice? I mean, I'm just talking about my 10-year-old distraction, not a general distraction that everybody has. But my 10-year-old distraction, I have to fillet out which is the thing that's attracting me. The actual work that can be accomplished. And that isn't really that's not really my mission. My mission is about individual empowerment. So I'm going to focus on my mission of individual empowerment for every single human being on the planet. So is this concept of social justice like a noble distraction, right? Like, is it throwing me off of my personal mission? And am I like creating a virtue around it? And am I getting sucked into the drama triangle and then going, no, this is about social justice. It's not about the drama triangle. When it really is, and that takes all my like psychological real estate, and now I'm derailed from my personal mission of empowering, like wanting to empower individuals, and now it's just a big mess, and now it's just and now I'm part of all the arguments and all the like the tweets and the Facebook messages and all that stuff, and I'm just like, I just had to create a boundary or border. I mean, a boundary with myself. We keep referring to it as borders, but I think boundary is a better word. But I've had to create a boundary with myself to go, you know what, maybe I just need to opt out of all of that and stay on my mission. And if I focus on my mission and people as individuals feel empowered, I have to trust that we're going to make headway with social stuff because other people have that as their personal missions. And so, I think that's what it is it's like, it's not getting too lost in sort of the nobility of it all, thinking that like when you are wasting your emotional and psychological and real estate, you want to validate that, and it's so easy, or I want to validate that rather, and it's so easy for me to call it nobility. And I've had to be very disciplined with myself to go, is it noble? Is the thing I'm doing the thing I'm supposed to be doing? This Facebook message about this movement, is that noble, or is it just me wanting to be a part of this big drama in the outside world and I need to stay on course? And I think the more you know where you're headed and have a very specific like sort of trajectory, the less likely you are to be pulled in these different directions, but you still can, right? And that's where that boundary with the self and self-discipline comes in.
I will speak from my own experience. We all overvalue our own experience. So I believe that I want my life to matter. I want that my journey in this life to have meant something. And I'm overvaluing that in me, and I'm going to project that onto you listening and say, because I experienced that so viscerally, my assumption is that you want your life to matter as well. Now, I don't know that to be true. Maybe you don't care about your life mattering at all, but I assume you do because I want it to matter for me so much. I assume Antonia does because I want it to matter for me so much. Like, I'm in touch with what I want so much that I'm assuming other people do. Now, again, that's an assumption of mine. I could be totally wrong. Everybody on the planet maybe doesn't care about what their life matters or not. But I kind of think they do because it matters so much to me. And I think if you mix that desire for us humans to have our existence here have mattered, and combine that with, I think most people in the West at least, when most of our basic needs are covered, and you might argue against that, but anybody in the West, at least here in North America, with a few cents in their pocket can go in and buy a banana, an exotic fruit. I don't care what climate you're in. You could be in like the coldest, snowy climate. You can go buy a banana at a convenience store for probably under $1. That's a pretty significant life we live. Like, even the most disenfranchised can go get exotic fruit in northern climates here in North America. Now, again, there's other countries where this isn't the case. There's developing countries where people are very impoverished and difficult. But most people in North America don't have it as tough as various parts of the world. And I think we also, because of the conveniences we all have, even some of the most poor among us here in North America, I still maintain that most people's lives are very boring. What is that quote? Most people are living lives of quiet desperation. Like, I really think people are bored and they're desperate for their life to matter and for some drama, right? Something important, something fun, something engaging, like something that feels like there's traction being had, like there's life's mattered and it's exciting, it's interesting. And if you combine those two things together, it's my belief that this is where we get some of this, right? And what I've done personally, like you talk about this Facebook thing, one of the boundaries that I put in for myself is, and it's a struggle because I'll read something and it'll be like, what? I'm righteously indignant about this. I need to post this on Facebook. And I'll go and I'll make some comment like, how dare, blah, blah. And I've just did this like 2 weeks ago, right? So I'm not saying I'm perfect around this, but I'm really trying to go. I can't tell you how many times in the last 2 months I've gone to post something on Facebook. Like, look at this article, look at this thing, and write about it. And I've like written it out and I've gone, what is the point of me posting this? Like, what do I hope to get out of this? Do I hope to rile other people up into a frenzy? Do I hope to have a comment war with people? Do I think this is going to change anybody's opinions or minds about anything? Like, do I even care about this topic enough to tomorrow, once the drama's over, like continue talking about it? And most of the time, like 99.9% of the time, it really freaking doesn't matter. Like, it's just I'm whipped up in the moment and I'm going, what is going on? What the heck? And I bet you've had this experience maybe in your life, or maybe somebody you've seen them post stuff and you're like, what is this guy all about? He's like all upset and angry about this thing. And I keep asking myself, like, to what end? This is taking me off mission. I have Personality Hacker. I'm working with Antonia. We're writing books. We're doing live events. We're podcasting. We have a microphone. We have a platform. We can constructively add to the conversation of life and humanity. And if I'm here posting and distracting myself with righteous indignation, making a Facebook post, I probably don't have a lot going on in my life. I'm probably not actually attuning myself to the real challenges and the things that will actually move the needle. And I have a system set up for that. Like, I've taken the time with Antonia. We've built a system. We've worked for years to build a platform to where people listen to what we say. People will listen to what we say. They will drive sometimes 8 hours to come and meet us at a meetup just for a few hours in an evening. We've had people drive very far to come and meet us and hang out with us. And if we have a meetup, I'd love to meet you in person. I think it's really cool to hang out. We're going to do live events next year. We're going to continue creating content. We're going to start getting more into video. We've built this platform over years. We've worked hard to build it so that we can articulate things that we believe will be helpful for humanity. And I'm going to sit there and waste my freaking time on Facebook with righteous indignation, making a post about something that I probably won't even care about tomorrow that much. This is the kind of thing that I'm starting to have realizations around. Like, what is going on with you, Joel? What is your problem, dude? And you might be listening going, well, I don't have a platform. Facebook is my platform. Well, maybe that's true. You can use Facebook. We use Facebook for our business. That's cool. But think about why you're doing what you're doing. And you might have a cause and you're using Facebook elegantly to get your cause out there or something you really care about. And my encouragement to you is to find ways to continue to do that. If it's something important to you, but guard your time around it getting hijacked. That's my advice, unsolicited to you listening. Guard your time because there's only a limited amount of time. And I think the older we get, and Tony and myself have been having lots of conversations around this, like we're about halfway-ish through our life. And if our lives are going to matter, we've got to stop doing the bullcrap we've done up till now that's been distraction for us. And I think this is really a big shift in me. It might sound like a little thing to you. You might have already had that shift in you. But for me, I'm like, I need to be rigorous and attuned to the things I actually care about and not get distracted by all this bullcrap.
Yeah, there's actually, I mean, when we think about how we use the platform that we have built, and like you said, we've spent years building this platform and having a microphone in front of us where we know that we actually can influence people. And we don't talk a lot about what's going on in the world. Like, it's very rare when we focus on that. Most of the time, what we're focused on is about individuals being able to help themselves. Like, it's always a default to that. And so I think the fact that we are careful on the podcast to not get too, political or to pull in too many of, the events that are current events that are happening in the world. Because for us, the through line is always personal empowerment. And building the tools you need and the skills you need in order to show up in the world the best. And the fact that we keep defaulting that indicates to me that for me, that's my real message. So all the distractions in other ways, they're distractions to me. Now, they might be missions for other people. Like you said, Facebook might be your platform. You might have a very strong mission that is more socially oriented or more current event based. And if that is your trajectory, then stay on target and don't get distracted with all the other stuff that's going on around. That's perfectly fine too. But I think what it is like you mentioned, when we don't have to deal with the drama of survival, then it's very easy for us to attach to other forms of drama to make our lives, like you mentioned, mean something, to make us feel like we have a voice or something is like we have a part of something that's important. And so it's easy to get caught up in things that will steal our psychological real estate and not have a focal point, not have a trajectory, not have a like an actual direction we're going, but still get that synthetic hit like, oh, my life definitely means something because I just made a Facebook post that got like 80 likes. And so therefore I have a voice in this world. And it's like, okay, maybe is that the specific thing you want to be doing? Is that your direction and your trajectory? Or is that simply something that you're doing to get a synthetic hit that you actually are on mission? And again, for me, it's filleting it out, right? The social piece I think is very important. And at the same time, I also recognize there are a lot of traps in the drama triangle. So I guess it's also creating strong distinctions in all of this, making sure that you're being very accurate in your assessment of whether or not you are staying on trajectory in the direction you want to be going, and recoup, or like making sure you have as much psychological and emotional real estate to apply to that as you possibly can sort of garner in your world. Or are you allowing yourself to get seduced by almost always these things that touch against it, like things like the drama triangle or other elements that are actually robbing you of some of that energy, and those things you call virtuous because they feel conflated with this other thing that you think is virtuous? Like, are you really sort of clean slicing whether or not you're staying on trajectory or whether or not you're allowing yourself to drift because the things that we drift towards, like the drama triangle, or like they give us that hit, right? It's that synthetic little hit of like meaning, purpose, indignation, righteousness, or whatever it is. But they also rob you and they'll seduce you away from your actual purpose. So I think being really rigorous with ourselves is a big piece of it as well. Like, am I staying on a nutritious path, or am I letting myself drift off into to the sort of the purpose version of candy?
I think that no one gives a crap about how many Facebook likes you have. The universe certainly doesn't give a shit about how many Facebook likes you have. I think that's a good point. Like, and the other thing is and here's the other challenge here with this too. And this is hard to say because I'm sitting behind a microphone, and my work is to articulate. Our work is to articulate, to write, to speak, to communicate. And the barrier of entry to be able to do that is so low that everyone thinks that because they speak out, they make a comment under a video, they make a Facebook post, like that's actually doing something, right? That does nothing for the world. A friend of mine just posted on Facebook the other day. She was walking in her hometown past a bridge, and someone had spray painted a racist like name or slogan on the bridge. She took a picture of it, posted it to Facebook, and said, somebody needs to do something about this. Like, why has this been allowed to be here on the side of this bridge in my hometown? And I didn't comment back because like I said, I'm having boundaries and stuff in my life to not get caught up in this. So I was just like I rolled my eyes and moved on and thought, well, you do something about it, goddammit. Like, what the heck? Like, who is they? They need to do something about this. Somebody else out there needs to be doing something about this. Like, we think that we articulate this out online, we make comments and Facebook posts, and that's going to fix the problem. Like, let's make more awareness around the shitty lives people have around the world and the stuff they have to go through. Like, that doesn't help anybody. I mean, it's good to have awareness, right? I think that awareness is key, but we have a lot of awareness now. Now someone needs to get up off their ass and actually take action and make something happen. And until we do that, we're going to continue to have the problems. And I'm not talking about getting up off your ass, grabbing a sign and going down to the courthouse and protesting. Again, that's just more awareness. I'm talking about actually figuring out ways to create solutions. And I don't think it's going to be through government and policy. I think it's going to be through changing the hearts and minds of people. And that's not going to be through bullying or making Facebook posts or articulating things even more clear on the airwaves. Like, that doesn't work that way. You have to get down, get your hands dirty, and start to implement change at the local level. So if you walk past a bridge in your town and someone spray painted a racist comment on it, get some paint and paint over it. Or go ask your administrators in the town, hey, do you care if I just take care of this? Like, I don't understand. Who are you hoping is going to come save you if you have this mentality? It drives me crazy. And this is something also I've realized is there's no one coming. There's no like savior coming to solve all this. Like, if it's going to change, we as people have to change that. If I want to see a difference, I can't just sit behind the microphone and talk about personal growth. I have to demonstrate it in my own life. I have to show up day in and day out when I'm frustrated at my children and we're in the car and they're acting up and I want to scream at them and like lose my shit on them, I have to go, you know what? If I want to set the example, if I want the next generation to do better than my generation did, I have to set the example for my kids now. And I'm saying I fall down on it. Of course I do. I'm sure you listening do this too. Antonia and myself, we're not perfect. Obviously, this stuff happens to all of us, right? But if we're going to see change in the world, we have to do it. There is no they. There is no board. And we talked about this in the Deferring Your Life program podcast. There's no board of directors planning your life for you. There's no general big articulated plan of path that you've got to be on. Life is random and absurd, and you put the meaning into it that you want. And if you want to sit there and bitch about the stuff in the world on Facebook or social media or wherever, be my guest, but you're not doing shit for anybody. All you're doing is adding to the noise. You're part of the problem. But if you want to make a difference and you want to start letting this stuff impact you, and you let it come out in your daily life with your spouse, with your lover, your partner, your kids, your coworkers, you show compassion and love and attunement, and you are focused on making yourself a better person and helping the other people around you find joy and expression and meaning in their life. Now that's powerful. That changes the world. And it starts with one person at a time embodying that and being different going forward.
Somebody mentioned something in a video I was watching on YouTube that when you grow up in a context of social media, you start to think that the things that matter virtually and digitally work in the real world as well. So your job in social media is to forward things or copy them or tag people or, like it's like you're basically all you have to do is just share things and your job is done. But that's not how it works in the actual physical, tangible world. And the same skills that work in social media do not translate to the actual physical plane. I also read recently that people under the age of 35 spend 41% of their day on their phones, which if you account for 8 hours of sleep, that's an extraordinary amount of time. What is that? 41% would be like what? Like if half the day is 12 hours, then 41% would be something like 10 and a half hours-ish, something like that. So people are spending 10 and a half hours, waking hours on their phones. So we are getting more and more disconnected from each other. We're getting more and more disconnected from how physical, tangible things work because we're so embedded in a virtual interface. And so this idea of like you mentioned, Joel, making things more aware. It's like, well, somebody should do something about this. And it's like, well, the tangible world is waiting for us to show up, right? Like the social media world doesn't have to wait. It seduces us. Again, these are virtues we get seduced into. It seduces us into believing we're doing stuff just by engaging with it. But that's not how the physical, tangible world of atoms works, right? Of energy interconnecting with each other. And I think we're getting more and more aware of this as people who run a virtual digital company. The importance of physically being in each other's presence in order to make things happen. Like when we go do meetups, the fact that, again, like Joel mentioned, people will drive insane amounts of time to come meet us, but also to meet like-minded people. It's not just us they're showing up for. They're also showing up for the community. You guys want to meet each other. Like you, the listener, would like to meet other people that are like you because you kind of on some intrinsic level understand the power of physically being in somebody else's presence. And I think that's one of the reasons why we really want to focus on doing more meetups and tours next year and physically going to cities is it's actually not a very smart business plan. Like it's very expensive. The ROI on a digital product versus the ROI on a physical product is light years,
Yeah, it's
different.
stupid. I mean, from a business standpoint, it's dumb.
Yeah, it's dumb. And at the same time, it's so powerful. It's so powerful for people to physically get in each other's presence. And this idea of thinking everything can be done virtually and digitally, like this is why we have a crumbling infrastructure. This is why bridges are falling apart. Like our physical, tangible bridges are falling apart because we spend so much time in a digital world where we think that that's the real world and that's where we're going to make our impact. So we want to go more, again, we want to protect our psychological and emotional real estate away from these seductive digital platforms that make us believe we're actually making an impact. And we want to pour so much more of our time in real estate into physical, tangible interchange to encourage people to actually do things in the material realm, not just in the cloud. And we suspect that if people get encouraged to actually take action in the physical world and not, again, I mean, on some level, signs in front of a courthouse are just it's almost like the rules of online will apply to the rules of the real world. I'm not saying that those kinds of things don't make any, like headway. I'm sure they do to some extent. And a sign in front of a courthouse.
You mean protesting?
Yeah, protesting or increasing awareness. I think that does have some tangible impact for sure. And as you mentioned, changing hearts and minds of people is very important. But that's kind of just sort of taking that concept of a tweet and putting it into the real world. Like instead of writing it on Twitter, you're just putting it on a cardboard and on a stick and taking it to a physical location. Like there's going to be a law of diminishing returns there. But if we can figure out that the rules of the real world do not obey the rules of the social media world, that it's a very different set of rules and impact happens in a different way, and we have boundaries with ourselves and we protect our psychological and emotional real estate, we have self-discipline, we figure out what it is that we want to accomplish, our through line, our direction, and our trajectory, and we go engage with it in the tangible physical world to actually try to move the needle. And we, again, protect ourselves and have self-discipline around all of the seduction of the online drama world, and we actually get to business. I think that that's probably one of the most empowering things a person can do. Because again, our message is also all about personal empowerment. I think most people think that things have to change in order for somebody to feel empowered enough to go live the life that they want to live. And I actually think it happens in the opposite. I think that people go do the things that are important to them, and then they gain empowerment along the way. Like you don't have to wait for somebody to set up a system for you to become your best actualized self. You go take action and you try to make that world happen for yourself, and actualization visits you progressively. It's an emergent of a system of you taking action. So I think that's why we kind of go on and on about this. Like it's super important for people to be personally empowered, and a node in that system is actually doing not just tasks, but actually like going out and physically doing things that prove to yourself that you have worth and value, that you have self-esteem, that you have the ability to impact your environment, regardless of whether or not your life has any sort of universal meaning. That doesn't really matter. If it has, meaning to yourself, subjective meaning, that you made an impact in the world, that's where, that concept of self-actualization happens. It's an emergent. So yeah, I think it kind of feels like we had a lot of different points here.
Yeah.
But I think that's really what it comes down to is don't mistake the online rules for the real world rules. Like they're not necessarily transferable skills. And protect yourself against the seduction of things that will drag you into a place that will just siphon your real estate. It will take from you. It doesn't give. The drama triangle in a social media environment is not a giver. It's a taker. Like you don't get anything from it except for these little synthetic hits. It's kind of like Cheetos. It tastes delicious in the moment, but you don't actually get any nutritional value from it. And you might even feel full, but there's no nutritional value there. But actually like implementing in your life and taking steps, even if you don't succeed, that's the crazy thing, is when you try to do something big and you have a trajectory, even if you don't accomplish your task, the process of going for it alone will help you build esteem and trust yourself, because you will accomplish something more than if you had just sat back and waited for somebody to go take care of the racist slogan on a bridge, right? Like that doesn't give you anything. You are in a completely disempowered position in that situation. But if you actually go and try to make something happen, even if you don't succeed, you'll have tested yourself way more than if you just leaned back. So I think it's really important to understand that self-discipline piece is super important. Boundaries with yourself, making sure that you're not just letting that energy go wherever the world will siphon it from you, and to stay on your mission, stay on your focus, your trajectory, and protect it so that you can actually be a person of impact.
I think the key here is something tangible. I agree. I do want to give caution to this idea, and I don't think you intended this, Antonia. This isn't against you at all, but because I'm guilty of this too. We frame personal growth or doing something in the world as like this epic, big, you go change the world. And I think there is wisdom in the daily plotting. of changing the little things you can control and change now, because changing the world is so abstract and out there and big that it might just be taking care of that racist slogan on the bridge in your town. It might just be something like, oh, hey, this one thing is like out of place and I could be the one to fix it or correct it. Like little contributions and the discipline of doing that will prepare you for when you have an opportunity to quote unquote do something big or change the world. It's almost like building, cause-based like disciplines, right? So if you want to have a big cause someday, something you actually care about, you're going to have a skill set built to be able to implement on that cause. And it doesn't have to necessarily be big right now, especially if you're young. There's little things you could do maybe on your school campus or in your community or even just in your freaking home. Like maybe you still are young enough to live with your mom and dad. Like I don't know what you think about Jordan Peterson. I know a lot of people disagree with him, but I think the whole message of clean your freaking room as a kid, I think that's a pretty good message because it teaches the discipline of doing something that you can control and be proud of and get emotion, right? And I don't agree with everything Jordan Peterson says, but I think that's a pretty good point. I think he's got a good point when he says that. These are access points for us to begin building those disciplines. And the universe doesn't give a crap about all this stuff that we think it does. Like it really doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. The legacy you leave on Facebook is probably not going to be your legacy. It's probably not going to be the thing that anybody gives a shit about 100 years from now. But if you make a small change maybe in your town or a big change, that might be something to remember. That might have an impact, a lasting impact on people's lives. And so if there's ways we can find tangible expressions of this, I think that's good.
Yeah, I'm glad you made that clarification because you're absolutely, in my opinion, you're absolutely right. This idea of the epic, you have to change the world message, I think has actually in some ways been very harmful to an entire generation of people. I recently had a friend of mine who's a millennial who was trying to impress, because I sometimes make these comments about millennials because I'm this old crusty Gen Xer. And she was like, you have to understand that millennials were raised with this message that it was their job to save the world. And she was giving me all these different examples. And I realized it's true. Like millennials got this sort of imprinting messaging that it's their job to save the world. So what are they doing right now? They're putting themselves in a hero position, which completely makes sense to me. And I don't think it's your job to save the world. Like, I don't think that, I think that that's also outsourced thinking. Like, in my opinion, being an empowered person doesn't mean that you went and saved the world, that you made some sort of big impact in the world. Like, your impact could be being the best parent that you can be, or just being the best human being, regardless of parent. It doesn't even have to be a legacy. You could be somebody who's got no interest in having kids, and you have no interest in like saving the world in any sort of way. You just want to show up as a good, solid human being. And so you positively impact the world by having every person who engages with you have a better experience. Like that's all it can be. Like that's it. Like and that would be perfectly acceptable. That's like a great way of interfacing with the world by just being the best version of yourself and showing up as a really solid human being. That alone, I think, would make a positive impact in the world, a positive ripple in the matrix of humanity. And so even thinking that you have to have this through line or this trajectory of a mission, the mission can just be being a better human being. And thinking that you have to go save the world in any sort of way is also outsourced thinking. Like if you don't feel any reason to, change the world or whatever, or be a part of any sort of social movement or cause, or like, that's fine. Like you don't have to. There's nothing in the guidebook of the life, universe, and everything that says that you have to go save the world. And I think that you're right. I think that can, in and of itself, because it's an outsourced opinion, can be damaging to the individual. So again, those are boundaries, right? Those are personal boundaries. I'm not going to allow the messages of the world to encroach on me. For me, individually, personally, those messages are almost always about, the social stuff that's going on around us. But it could just be this idea that you have to go save the planet. Like you don't have to save the planet. That could be your encroaching message. Or it could be that you want to make a huge impact and the encroaching message is you can't, right? That you're just one person. So it's not really about what the message it is. It's not the content. It's not the specific message. It's whether or not you're going to allow these messages to rob you of your energy that you could be applying to the thing that you actually want, the thing that you really truly want in the world. And I think that that's the discipline that we need to build, is to not get seduced into whatever version of that message masks itself or masquerades as something virtuous.
So we've been doing a lot of talking. We'd love to hear from you. We freeformed this podcast talking about some of the things that we've been having ahas around, some of the insights we've been going through, and some of the personal growth stuff. And it got intense there for a little bit. I was like on a little bit of a rant.
We'll have to mark this one as explicit lyrics.
But but I think that we'd love to hear your story about maybe something in your personal growth life that's happened in the last few months. Something that's been an aha, a shift for you, something that you've really embodied. Maybe you've changed your behavior, you've changed your way of seeing things. For me, I know, like, I guess to sum it up, if I'm going to be a high-performing person that actually makes a difference, and I'm going to be on mission, I have to be very disciplined and intentional about that. Like, that's been, I guess, to sum up everything I've been saying up till now, and it's wonderful. When you're around people on mission, you feel a hum from them. You know it. It's clear to you that they have something they are focused on and intent on. And that's my personal, like, this is what I'm wiring up to do. I'm learning how to channel into my unconscious, to rely upon myself better, to understand my own core motivations, to set clear boundaries around my time and energy. These have been the ahas that have come up for me, and we've given some examples of those here on the podcast. Write in underneath this podcast in the comments and share your story. What are some of the things that you've been scaling up around in your personal life? What are the ahas that you've come down on? Let's get a conversation going around this. I think it's going to be really powerful for us as a community to talk about this and have a conversation around the biggest personal growth thing that you've had happen in the last 3 to 6 months. And let's all share this together under this podcast and get this conversation going.
If you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. If you'd like to leave us a rating and review on iTunes, that's very helpful. And also, if you have picked up a copy of the Personality Hacker book and you'd like to leave a rating and review on Amazon, that also helps us out a lot.
My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we will talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.